Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's podcast, we have Lauren Beagen, maritime industry expert, principal and founder of Squall Strategies, LLC, and the Maritime Professor. Don't forget to check out her podcast, By Land and by Sea, a fellow podcaster on the pod today. Lauren is an attorney by trade, so it's going to be great to talk to her. What we're going to talk about today, we're going back to a Tell Me More Tuesday episode, and we're going to talk about container alliances, what they are, and a bit about what happened recently in the news with the recent breakup of a big one. Lauren, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, as a fellow podcaster, it's great. I'm so excited to have you on. So we're going to talk about container alliances, a little bit of history, a little bit what we're doing, and like I like to ask, why are you an expert in today's topic? Because this is a topic, and I wrote about it, on some LinkedIn posts. I have no idea about it. I spent 30 plus years in the industry, and this is foreign as the day I started. So tell us about why you're an expert on this topic.
Isn't it so funny that maritime feels like it's a niche area, but even within maritime, the pie can be sliced so much thinner, and each section is its own little thing.
It's amazing, isn't it? It really is. You think you're an expert. You're an expert in your little world.
Live the maritime world, right? Exactly. So I'm a maritime attorney, like you said. I went to Roger Williams up in Rhode Island. They had a joint degree program on maritime law and a master's in marine affairs over at the University of Rhode Island. So I've always been drawn to maritime. I got my captain's license, my 50-ton, when I was still in college. I've just always, I grew up on Lake Michigan. I've always been drawn to maritime. Why you should listen to me, why I might know a little bit about this stuff. I actually worked at the regulatory agency that does regulate all of this. So I worked at the Federal Maritime Commission in Washington, D.C. I was the international affairs attorney. So kind of got exposure to everything that the agency was doing because I was helping to, negotiate some of our international bilateral, multilateral, either supporting the political or kind of prepping for myself to be there with our other U.S. government delegation. The ocean alliances are regulated by the Federal Maritime Commission. And I always like to kind of stop at this point. The FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission, is different than MARAD. MARAD is an agency, Maritime Administration is an agency of the Department of Transportation. It's more of a promotional side, U.S. flag fleet, whereas the Federal Maritime Commission is an independent regulatory agency. But I didn't only work at the regulatory level. I did work at the Port of Boston. So I have had my boots on the docks. I have seen what it feels like to be in and around the world, besides having my captain's license, which I didn't ever use truly commercially. I worked on a party catamaran, but I did work up at the Port of Boston. And so I always like to say it's kind of applied to that backwards, regulatory first and then the user experience. But either way, I kind of got both sides of the industry, and really it gave me a deeper understanding of what it all means and how it all works together.
That's fascinating. Hey, listen, no matter how you do it, whether you go, on the desk first and then, kind of more terminal side or ship side, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess what it matters at the end of the day is the experience and stuff. And that's a fascinating experience. And one thing, and I'm sure you see this, we talked earlier about, I know your podcast is more, you've been on other podcasts and yours is more just informative people. But I do know for myself is when you talk to people, you see their experience and their background. You're like, wow, that's really cool. Certainly being a lawyer and having that FMC background. Again, the FMC is always kind of mentioned as the side of what we talk about. A lot of what, if anybody, talks about anything on this podcast, it'll be about MARAD, right? Certainly building the training ships, that's MARAD. Certainly Jones Act is MARAD. Up until a recent time, that got more of the press, and now, of course, it's a little different. So tell us today, and Tell Me More Tuesday, tell me more about these big container alliances. Tell me how they're formed, why they're formed, kind of what people generally see as the benefits, and kind of where we are today with that.
Yeah, so the big news was the 2M Alliance was breaking up, but so this is one of the things that I do on my podcast. I really like to kind of break down all of the jargon and all of the nuance and all the kind of technical stuff into real people talk, right? I mean, because if nobody understands it and nobody can kind of follow along, then what are you even trying to share the information for? So 2M Alliance is an ocean alliance. What does that mean? So we're kind of most familiar with alliances generally in the airline side of things. So that's going to be something that we're most familiar with. So what's happening in the ocean alliances is they're sharing vessels. the same way airlines kind of share aircraft, right? I mean, so it's the same idea. So Southwest is not part of an alliance. And so you might have to stop over in Kansas City on your way to Denver. But the benefit of flying Delta or United, they're going to code share with another aircraft. And so instead of having to stop over, now you can just take Eagle Air doing business as Delta straight to Denver. And that's kind of the benefit, what was imagined in ocean alliances to be the benefit there too. It was to improve efficiency, minimize the cost, and really provide higher quality services to the shipping public by creating better routes, creating better lanes, creating better opportunities so that you can just call up your preferred ocean carrier that you usually work with, that you already have that relationship with, and say, I need to move things from Vietnam to Oakland. But previously, they might not have had that trade route. But now, because of their vessel sharing agreement, their pooling of the ships. So 2M is Maersk and MSC. You might love doing all of your business with Maersk, but you had MSC as an option. So wherever they also sail, that they contribute ships into this vessel sharing agreement, you could hop on one of their ships and not really have to change much in your user experience.
That's really interesting. So, and then the other one is the Ocean Alliance. Is that separate or is that the same thing?
So yeah, so there's three actually. There's three alliances. So there's 2M Alliance, and that was the kind of one that we started off with. So that's Maersk and MSC.
Right.
We have the Ocean Alliance. So that is Costco, which includes OOCL, CMA CGM, and Evergreen Line. And then we have a third one, which is the Alliance, or THE, which I think is like the High Efficiency Alliance. It's an acronym for something, but everyone kind of jokes the Alliance, like the Ohio State. The Alliance. So the Alliance has Hapag-Lloyd, One, which is the Japanese carriers, Ocean Network Express, Hyundai Merchant Marine, and Yang Ming.
Okay, now that's really interesting. Yeah, and I think putting it in the very layman's term of, seeing code share when you buy a ticket, like this is, there's United, there's the American one, and I think a couple of others as well. So in recent days, we saw a big, relatively public split. They give a notice. Talk a little bit about that and kind of really what that means, not only in the short term, but kind of going forward. Is this a kind of a harbinger of things to come for the other alliances, or is this maybe these guys were too big anyway and they really didn't need each other? Because really, if I'm not mistaken, this I do know, Maersk and MSC are 1-2, well, 2-1, whatever. So talk a little bit about that for everybody.
Yeah, that's right. So MSC is the largest carrier these days, and they actually dethroned, I guess you could say, Maersk from the top spot. So MSC is the largest, Maersk is the second largest. And so they are part of this 2M. So collectively, these two beasts in the industry are working together in vessel sharing. And let me be clear, they cannot rate share. They can't talk about rates. They can't do anything that is rate related. These are simply vessel sharing agreements, operationally based. That's all that they're allowed to talk about. They aren't rate setting clubs. They aren't conferences, which is a previous creation. They're not membership clubs. They just strictly are this vessel sharing. So I mean, it worked out great for a long time. They had this agreement that was filed. So all of these Ocean Alliance agreements are filed with the Federal Maritime Commission. They're filed with 45 days notice. An interesting fact is that the FMC actually doesn't have the ability to deny these agreements when they're filed. If they want to stop an agreement from going into effect, they have to file an injunction against the agreement in a court outside of the FMC, which that's a pretty high hill to get over, especially if, let's say, so there's 9 alliances or nine ocean carriers in these 3 alliances. What if all 9 of them were to combine together? We know that they'd make up about 85% of market share collectively, all 9 of them. What if they were to all file together and say, we're just going to do it? We're doing a vessel sharing agreement. Obviously, the FMC would take issue with that, but they couldn't deny it. They couldn't stop it in its tracks. They would have to pool all of their resources. I mean, there's only 120, maybe 130 employees at the FMC right now. They probably have to stop everything they're doing just to get everybody, all hands on deck, to stop this 80% new alliance. Unlikely that would get filed, but I mean, after 2020, anything's possible, right? I think we take nothing for granted.
Yeah, everything got turned on its head. Black is white, white is black, all that good stuff. Up is down.
Right.
And now that they've kind of fallen apart, I mean, is this something that you think is going to affect these other alliances, or are these guys kind of just going, yeah, we saw this coming anyway? What's the kind of the feeling and the temperament there?
Yeah, so great question. So when these agreements are filed, they actually there's kind of self-imposed different restrictions. So they put expiration dates in these agreements. And so this was a little less surprising. I mean, granted, they're the two largest in the carrier world right now, but a little less surprising for those of us who kind of follow the ocean carrier world. 2M's agreement was filed in 2014, and it actually had language in there that said after 8 years, we can give 2 years notice that we're going to dissolve the whole thing. And so
Right.
that's what they did. They said there was a 10-year term of agreement. So they filed in 2014. 8 years had passed since 2014, which is 2022. The first month of the next year of 2023, the first time that they were able to say we're dissolving this, they did. And so the other two alliances have similar expiration terms, but they're longer. So the Ocean Alliance has a term that doesn't expire until 2027. And the alliance has a term that doesn't expire until 2030. So what my question is, they can file amendments to these alliances, but per their own terms, they're not allowed to leave, but that doesn't necessarily say that they can't swap out. And so that's what I think is going to be interesting. I don't think they're going to be doing a ton of swapping until maybe 2027 or 2030. Like I said, the two other expiration times, but anything is possible. These expirations aren't mandated by the FMC. At one point, actually, FMC Chairman Dan Maffei in front of Congress said, wouldn't that be nice if we had some kind of expiration regulatory authority here? But they just don't. They really don't have a lot of regulatory authority over the specifics of these alliance agreements. And so I don't expect anything to happen until 2027 or 2030. That's not to say that they might not have these slot charter agreements. And that's something that we've seen them kind of dabble in. It was basically what was happening prior to alliances. There were a lot of slot charter agreements, so taking space on here and there, but it was kind of all cobbled together. And so the alliance was supposed to help streamline all of that. Zim has been working quite a bit with 2M as an alliance. I could see that relationship continuing. Whether that turns into Maersk and Zim have a new alliance, maybe. I don't know if Zim's interested in alliances. They traditionally haven't been part of alliances. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I think in the immediate, though, unfortunately, I think it's not going to be good for rates. I don't think it's going to have a significant impact, but I think that this uncertainty in the market, unfortunately, probably won't fare well for positive rates. But then you have so much capacity, so many new vessels coming onto the market. So,
Yeah,
that's going to play into the rates.
yeah, I'm kind of just wondering, was this driven by the amount of capacity that's coming into the market? And maybe one of these guys said, we can maybe do this on our own. We see all these new tonnage coming in. We see people who may want to sell fleets or sell ships, and we could just, buy them or buy a fleet. We've seen that with certainly with Maersk. I'm less familiar with MSC, but certainly with Maersk have bought fleets before, and there was an article recent about all the historical names that they've retired recently. I don't know them off the top of my head. Besides Sea Lands and stuff like that, they've retired these kind of historical names, saying that maybe this is like the play is like, we're just going to control everything internally, which goes against kind of diversification and things like that. But certainly it's going to be very interesting to watch that space. So that was a very good primer. That's a whole new world that I have nothing to know about. The FMC is like, okay, great. This was really entertaining to talk about. Any final thoughts from you on all of this before we close out the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I think so 90% of everything moves by ocean transit, right? And arguably like 5% of society knows that. So I love that everybody's getting a little more keyed in to all facets of ocean shipping, right? Whether it's bulk or containerized cargo or whatever it is. I'm just so thrilled to have people kind of diving in and really learning more about it. I mean, predicated probably because people had to spend millions of dollars in detention and demurrage, but okay, you're here. Let's welcome you to Maritime. So I'm so thrilled for all your listeners and for all my listeners and just everybody who's taken an interest in Maritime generally.
That's right. That's right. And we hope that everybody, don't forget to tune in to Lauren's podcast. So you drop on Fridays, I believe, right?
Friday afternoon. Yep. I do a LinkedIn Live at 1 p.m. and then it drops after that.
Nice. And you do that on LinkedIn, like you said, and then also distributed usual places where you get your podcast, right?
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Awesome. Don't forget to follow and like Lauren, leave her a nice review and all that good stuff. And well, that's it. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Maybe we'll do this again in a couple of months. We'll find a cool topic. We were talking before, maybe with something with the FMC and their digitization. We're going to be dropping a podcast. You're going to hear this first with somebody who's going to talk a little bit about that. So maybe we can dive into that a little bit deeper, maybe later in the summer. So Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Chris. Great to be here. Thanks.
Once again, I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Thank you for listening to today's version of Tell Me More Tuesday. I hope you learned a bit about this topic that's new for me and this podcast. It's always great learning about parts of the industry that are away from my expertise and maybe even away from yours. Don't forget to like and follow The Last Dinosaur at all the places you get your podcasts. Once again, wishing you fair winds and following seas.